Good morning, Uncle Jogger. Please, will you be my daddy just for today?
That's what 5-year-old Emily said to the quiet, brooding man who jogged past her gate every morning at 7:20 a.m. What she didn't know was that the man she called Uncle Jogger was actually Tare Akin, a 52-year-old billionaire hiding in plain sight after being betrayed by the two people he trusted most. What started as an innocent request for a school event slowly turned into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. Her single mother, Faith, never expected the man upstairs to become anything more than a friendly neighbor. But soon there were lingering glances, slow dinners, secret kisses, and burning nights they couldn't walk away from. But when secrets rise, exes return, and everything is exposed, one question remains. Will this love survive when the truth finally steps out of the shadows? To find out what happens, sit back and watch till the end. Don't forget to like, comment, and follow Oma Tales for more gripping African love stories. Lucky mornings always carried a certain rhythm. Cars starting, generators humming off as PHCN flickered on, and the soft laughter of school children weaving through the estate's narrow streets. Faith Obi tightened Emily's ribbon as they stepped out of the modest boys' quarters they called home. She'd made sure her daughter's uniform was ironed sharp, socks bright white, and braids neat. It was the little things that mattered, especially when you didn't have much else. Faith had moved in a year ago. The rent was suspiciously reasonable for a place in Lekki Phase 1. But when she'd asked about the landlord, the agent had simply shrugged and said he didn't come around often. She hadn't thought much of it. Quiet landlords were a blessing. But a month ago, things shifted. The main duplex had come alive. She'd heard the gates open late one Friday night, and by morning, the upstairs curtains were drawn back. A car, a sleek black Range Rover with no plates, sat silently by the wall. She hadn't seen who owned it until the next morning. It became routine. Every day at exactly 6:45 a.m., just as she and Emily were stepping out to catch Kiki to school, he jogged past them, like clockwork. He wasn't young, not in the reckless way men in their 20s were, but he wasn't old either. There was a quiet authority in the way he moved, deliberate, powerful, controlled. His skin was deep brown, smooth like clean wood. His hair was close cut, with silver at the temples, and his beard, thick, low, perfectly groomed, was tinged with salt. Emily had been the first to speak. "Good morning, Uncle," she chirped that first day, waving at him like he was Father Christmas in sportswear. He hadn't replied, not with words. Just a brief glance, a polite nod, and a return to his jog. Faith had been embarrassed. "Emily, don't greet people that don't greet you back," she'd said quietly, tugging her daughter's hand. "But Mummy, he looks lonely," Emily whispered. She hadn't known what to make of that. Still, her daughter persisted. Every morning after that, Emily waved at him. "Good morning, Uncle Jogger," she'd say cheerfully. At first, it was the same half-hearted nod. Then, after about 2 weeks, it shifted. His nods came with faint smiles, then a full smile. Then one day, he slowed down, adjusted his earbuds, and said, "Morning, Princess. Hope school treats you well." Faith had turned her face away that morning, pretending to scroll through her phone. But her chest had fluttered in the strangest way. After that, it became their thing. "Uncle Jogger," Emily would wave. "Good morning, Emily. Be good today," he'd say, even though they never told him her name. He had a calm voice, deep, smooth, the kind that could cut through noise without ever needing to rise. He never lingered, never flirted, never asked Faith a single question, but he always smiled at Emily. And sometimes, just before he jogged off again, his eyes would slide to Faith, and she'd feel seen. She hated that feeling. It reminded her of things she'd buried. Faith Obi had spent the last 3 years rebuilding a life she never thought she'd need to rebuild. Her ex had drained her financially, emotionally, and spiritually. She'd left with nothing but Emily, a few clothes, and a mind full of regrets. Now she taught at St. Dominic's Secondary School in Aja, graded endless essays, packed school lunches at 5 a.m., and prayed her small salary stretched until the 27th. Love was not part of her vocabulary anymore. It was a luxury, like bubble baths and vacations. So why did a man jogging in sweat-drenched shirts make her feel like a teenager? "Mummy," Emily whispered, as they stepped out the gate. "He's coming." Faith looked up, and right on cue, there he was, approaching from the bend, gray shirt darkened with sweat at the chest and back, earbuds tucked in, that same quiet power in his stride. Emily beamed, waved furiously. "Good morning, Uncle Jogger." He slowed, just slightly, and smiled. "Morning, beautiful. Don't forget to eat your lunch." Then his eyes flicked to Faith. Brief, unreadable. "Morning, ma'am." Faith nodded, lips tight. "Morning." They watched him jog past. Emily grinned. "Mummy, I like him. He smells nice." Faith rolled her eyes but felt the tiniest smile tug at her lips. "He's just jogging, baby. Nothing special." But deep down, her body disagreed. As they reached the estate gate and flagged a tricycle, Faith turned once more to glance back at the compound. He was rounding the corner. She didn't know that the man she called Uncle Jogger was Tare Akin, former oil mogul, one-time boardroom god, and the man who had once been on Forbes' Africa's cover before vanishing into thin air. She didn't know he'd once had everything, and then walked away from it all when love turned to betrayal. She didn't know that her daughter's cheerful greetings had been the first warmth he'd felt in years. She didn't know, yet, but fate had already started its slow, beautiful dance. Emily was quiet on the ride back from school. Not her usual humming self, not full of questions or bursting with stories about who tripped during assembly or what color pencil Chidinma borrowed without returning. She just sat there in the back of the Kiki, bag on her lap, chin resting on her chest, her toes brushing against Faith's skirt as they bumped along Admiralty Road. Faith had seen this mood before. Something was wrong. They got home, washed hands, changed into comfy house clothes, and had jollof rice with fried egg for lunch. Emily picked at her plate, pushing rice grains into a smiley face. "Spill it," Faith said gently, wiping her fingers on a napkin. Emily looked up slowly, the corners of her mouth tight. "We're having Interhouse Sports soon," she said quietly. Faith nodded, sipping her water. "That's good now. You love running." "There's a father-daughter sack race," Emily added. Faith froze slightly. "Oh, I told them I won't do it," she said quickly, "because I don't have a daddy." But then everyone started looking at me like I was sick. Faith's throat tightened. "Baby, you're not—" I know, Emily interrupted, still not meeting her eyes. "You always say it's okay, that we're enough, but Mummy—" She looked up now, eyes wide, shining, heartbreaking. "Can't we borrow one, just for that day?" Faith blinked. "Borrow a what?" "A daddy. Emily, I mean, not a real one," she rushed out. "Just someone to help. You know, like Uncle Jogger." Faith nearly choked on her water. "What?" "You know, the man in the compound," Emily said with alarming innocence. "He's strong and tall and he's nice to me. He can jump, he can help me win. Everyone likes him, he won't shout or anything, I promise." Faith stared at her daughter like she'd grown two heads. "No," Emily blinked. "Why not?" "Because that's not how life works, Emily. You don't just assign strangers to play your father. He's not a stranger. He knows my name. That doesn't make him family." "But he's nice." "Emily!" Faith snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "Enough!" Her daughter's eyes widened, bottom lip beginning to tremble. Faith exhaled and pinched the bridge of her nose. The silence that followed was painful, too big for the tiny living room. "Look," she tried, softer now. "I know it's hard. I know sometimes you feel left out. But that man, we don't even know his full name, okay? We don't know what he does, where he works, if he's married or worse, if he's dangerous." "He's not dangerous. You don't know that." "Yes, I do," Emily whispered fiercely, tears gathering now. "I know it in my heart." Faith's own heart broke a little at that. Her daughter had learned to listen to feelings more than facts, because facts had let them down. "I'm sorry," Faith said, her voice thick with guilt. "But we're not doing that, Emily. I'll talk to your teacher and ask if an uncle or teacher can join you instead." Emily sniffed. "It won't be the same." "I know," Faith whispered, "but it's better than pretending." That night, after Emily fell asleep, curled up with her stuffed giraffe, her cheeks still damp from tears, Faith stepped out into the compound, barefoot, arms crossed, leaning against the balcony railing. The house above was quiet. Lights off, curtains drawn, no music, no signs of life, but her mind refused to rest. She thought of the man upstairs, his silence, his gentleness with Emily, the way he always took his earbuds out when the child greeted him. He had never once looked at them with pity, never once crossed a line, never once acted like the estate's usual married men who offered help with sinister smiles. He was just there, solid, calm, almost sad. Still a stranger, yes, but a different kind. Faith closed her eyes. A stranger wasn't the same as a danger, but she couldn't risk another disappointment. Not for herself, not for her daughter, and especially not from a man whose name she didn't even know. Upstairs, in the main duplex, Tare Akin stood in the shadows of his sitting room, curtain slightly drawn, glass of whiskey in hand. He had seen the girl crying through the window earlier. Then, the argument. Then, the silence. He heard the slam of the bathroom door, the muffled sound of comfort that didn't work. And now, the mother, arms folded like armor, eyes glazed with old pain. He sipped his drink slowly. He hadn't meant to matter to anyone here, least of all a child. But the way Emily smiled when she saw him, the way she lit up like the world was okay as long as he said, "Be good today," it did something to his chest. He closed the curtain and walked away. He wasn't anyone's daddy, but damn it, for the first time in years, he wished he could be. It was Saturday, the day of the Interhouse Sports. Faith had ironed Emily's yellow sportswear twice, braided her hair in neat zigzags, and packed enough snacks to feed a classroom. She had also rehearsed her excuses. She would tell Emily's teacher that a staff member from school would stand in for the sack race, or maybe a PTA uncle, anything but this foolish idea of asking a man they barely knew to pretend. But Emily had her own plans. As they stepped out of the compound that morning, Faith still fixing Emily's collar, she saw him, jogging as always. Only this time, he wasn't in a rush. He had slowed to a walk. He looked softer today, as though he'd slept well for once. And then, just like that, Emily let go of Faith's hand and darted straight to him. Faith's heart stopped. "Emily!" she called sharply. Too late. The girl had already reached him, standing in front of the tall, towering man like David before Goliath, but with none of the fear. "Uncle Jogger," she said, breathless. "Please, will you be my daddy for today?" Tare froze. He blinked slowly, as though the words had floated from a dream. Faith rushed forward, grabbing Emily's wrist. "I'm so sorry," she said breathlessly, avoiding his eyes. "I told her it wasn't appropriate." "No!" Emily protested, eyes wide with rising panic. "Please don't shout at me. Please, Mummy, don't shout. I just want someone to hold my hand and jump with me, just once." Faith stood there, caught between scolding her daughter and the sharp edge of shame slicing through her. Tare looked down at the little girl. Her eyes shimmered. She wasn't begging. She was simply hopeful. "I can't ask God for a real daddy," Emily added, "but maybe I can borrow one just for today." Silence. Even the estate seemed to hush. Tare bent slightly, resting his hands on his knees, and spoke gently. "You want to win this race, Abby?" Emily nodded furiously. He turned to Faith. "She deserves to win." Faith's breath caught. "Please, sir. You don't have to do anything else," she murmured, voice low. "I'll understand if it's too much." He studied her then, really looked at her. She wasn't just beautiful. She was worn, but dignified, holding life together with stubborn strength. The kind of woman who had learned to survive without asking anyone for help. "I'll go," he said finally, standing tall again. "Let me shower. We'll drive there together." Faith blinked. "Are you sure?" He gave the smallest smile. "You said it's just for today." St. Dominic's Field was packed. Colorful tents lined the edges. Students in house colors chanted war songs. Parents crowded under umbrellas and folding chairs. Teachers barked orders. And in the middle of it all stood Emily, bouncing with excitement in her yellow tee. Tare had arrived looking clean, calm, and dangerously handsome. Dark blue joggers. A white polo shirt that hugged his chest. Clean sneakers. Faith had barely been able to form a sentence when he walked up beside her. "You look," she trailed off, "like someone's daddy for a day." He replied, lips twitching. She looked away, hiding her blush. When their turn came, Emily bounced in place as they were handed their sack. Tare crouched beside her, speaking in low tones, and whatever he said made her beam. Then the whistle blew. They launched forward. Emily screamed in laughter. Tare stayed perfectly in rhythm with her jumps, holding her hand, guiding her like he'd done this 100 times. Parents cheered, teachers clapped, and Faith felt something in her chest crack open. They reached the finish line first. Victory. Emily jumped up and down, wrapping herself around him like he was her real father. He lifted her, spun her once, then set her down gently, smiling as she clutched her plastic gold medal like it was a crown. Faith found herself blinking too fast. After the race, as parents gathered for food and final announcements, Tare came over and sat beside her on the low bench. Emily was off showing her medal to a classmate. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't do much," he replied. "You did everything," she whispered. He looked at her then, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Earthy, clean, subtle. His voice dropped. "Let's take her out, to celebrate." Faith blinked. "Sorry? Ice cream, or whatever kids like these days." She hesitated. He leaned in slightly. It's not a date. It's for her. Right, she said, lips tugging. Just her. He smiled again. But they both knew. This was the start of something more. The sun was soft and golden as they walked through the open-air mall in Lekki, Emily skipping ahead of them with her medal jangling around her neck like royalty. Should we eat here or just grab something and head back? Faith asked, glancing at the fast food options. I know a spot, Tare said. Not too far. Quiet. They do proper food. No cardboard chicken. Faith raised a brow. You've lived here long enough to find hidden food joints? I like to eat. Alone, mostly, but well. She smiled at that. He hadn't said much on the drive over, but his presence filled every corner of the car. It wasn't loud, just charged. They ended up in a simple corner restaurant tucked away behind a filling station. No branding, no crowd. Just clean white walls, cold air conditioning, and the rich scent of freshly fried plantain. They took a table by the window. Emily sat between them, humming as she dipped Puff Puff into ketchup like a rebel. Tare ordered jollof with grilled fish and dodo for all three of them. When the food came, Faith couldn't lie. It was heaven on a plate. She moaned softly at the first spoonful and didn't even realize until she saw the look on his face. He didn't smile. He just stared. That unreadable, quiet gaze. Faith shifted in her seat, suddenly hyper-aware of the way her blouse clung to her chest, the delicate gold chain that dipped between her breasts, the curve of her hip pressing against the edge of the chair. She looked away. You okay? He asked, voice lower now. Yeah, she murmured, reaching for her water. Just hot. It's the pepper, he said, eyes still fixed on her. Sometimes the heat sneaks up on you. His words meant more than they should have. They ate, laughed, watched Emily tell a dramatic story about how a classmate fell face first in the sand and blamed juju. Tare laughed fully for the first time, head thrown back, teeth flashing. Faith didn't realize she was staring until he turned and caught her. She didn't look away. Something shifted. After the meal, Tare insisted on paying, refused any argument. I ran a sack race in public, that's worth at least a plate of dodo and puff puff, he teased. They drove back slowly. Emily dozed off in the back seat, medal still hanging loosely around her neck. Faith kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, her chest full. She's incredible, he said suddenly, eyes still on the road. She's my everything, Faith replied. She saved me. He looked at her then. You've been through it, haven't you? Faith didn't answer for a long while. Then softly, yeah, but I'm still standing. He nodded. That's what strength looks like. Their eyes met. No more words were spoken. Back at the compound, Tare helped carry Emily, sleeping soundly, to the BQ. His arms cradled her like she was made of light. Faith opened the door, guiding him inside. The room was warm. He laid Emily gently on the bed, brushing her braid from her cheek. Faith watched from the doorway, something tightening in her chest. Watching him with her daughter, it broke something open in her, something lonely, something hungry. He stood and turned. They were inches apart now. The air pulsed between them. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't reply. His gaze dropped to her lips, then to her neck, then back to her eyes. You're welcome, he said softly. Neither moved. Neither blinked. Faith swallowed hard. Would you like to stay for a drink? He hesitated. One drink. It was just a bottle of malt in a clean glass, but the way she poured it, slow and careful, made it feel like something more. He sat on the couch while she kicked off her shoes and tucked her feet under her, close but not touching. They sipped and talked about Lagos, teaching, the school system, random childhood memories, and somewhere between laughter and comfortable silence, her hand brushed his knee. It was innocent, accidental. Except it wasn't. Not the way his eyes darkened, not the way he reached out, slow, deliberate, and tucked a curl behind her ear. Her breath caught. His thumb lingered just a moment longer against her cheek than it needed to. She turned her face slightly toward his hand, and almost kissed his palm. I should go, he said softly, voice rough. Okay, she whispered, not meaning it. Neither moved, not until he stood, brushing the fabric of his joggers smooth, not until she followed him to the door. He paused before leaving. Thank you for trusting me with her, he said, voice low. She trusts you, Faith murmured. I'm just trying to catch up. His lips twitched, then dropped back into that unreadable calm. Good night, Faith. Good night, Tare. The door clicked shut behind him. She leaned against it, chest rising and falling like she'd run a marathon. Outside, in the moonlit silence of the compound, Tare exhaled and looked up at the stars, wondering when exactly he'd stopped running. The rain came unexpectedly that night. Lagos had a way of hiding its weather plans. One moment the air was warm and dry, the next, sheets of rain beating rooftops like war drums. Power flickered off just after 8 p.m., plunging the compound into velvet darkness. Faith lit one candle, then another. The small sitting room glowed gold. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch during her cartoon marathon. Her chest rose and fell slowly under the blanket. The medal from the race was now tucked safely in her school bag, as if even in sleep she couldn't bear to part with it. Faith stared at the flickering flame in the corner. Her thoughts weren't with the rain, or PHCN, or the dishes still soaking in the sink. Her thoughts were upstairs, with him, Tare. She told herself she was just grateful for what he did, for the way he handled Emily, for the way he saw her. Not pitied. Saw. But deep inside, gratitude had cracked open into something warmer, darker, needier. Then came the knock. One soft, precise knock. Her heart stuttered. She padded across the room barefoot and opened the door. Tare stood there in the rain, water glistening on his shoulders. He wore a black tee and sweatpants. "Lights went out," he said. "Just checking you two were okay." Faith stepped aside without speaking. He entered, his presence swallowing the room instantly. Emily stirred but didn't wake. Faith pulled the blanket higher around her, then nodded toward the table. "I've got malt, tea. No light for wine unless you brought your own candle." He smiled faintly. "Tea's fine." Minutes later, they sat side by side on the small settee, the candle between them flickering like it was caught in the same tension they were. "I didn't plan to stay long," he said. "You never do," she murmured. He turned to her. "Should I leave?" Faith didn't answer. She met his gaze instead. Eyes deep. Bare. Tired of pretending. And something inside her broke. She reached out, gently brushed a drop of rainwater from his temple. Her fingers lingered. He didn't flinch. His hand covered hers. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. When their lips touched, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Soft at first, then deeper. Faith's breath hitched as his hands slid into her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt. The kiss stretched long. Hungry, but careful, like they were both afraid of waking up. He pulled back an inch, rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. Instead, she kissed him again, and again, until her back found the armrest of the couch and his body hovered above hers. Their breaths were shallow, mingled. Tare's fingers ran down her neck, pausing at the curve of her collarbone. "You're not what I expected," he murmured. "I don't know what I am anymore," she said, voice breaking. He kissed her neck, slow, reverent. "You're a woman I want." The words vibrated through her skin. Her blouse slipped open beneath his hands, trembling, seeking permission. She gave it, silently, completely. He traced his mouth along the edge of her shoulder, and she arched into him, feeling her own name dissolve on her tongue. The heat between them burned slow, coiling like smoke around a flame that refused to go out. But then, a tiny sigh from the couch. Emily stirred. Faith's eyes flew open. They stared at each other. Guilt, desire, frustration, all colliding in a flash. She buttoned her blouse slowly. He leaned back, catching his breath. Faith stood, pulled the blanket snug around her daughter. Her hands were shaking. Tare stood too. "I should go." Faith nodded, but didn't meet his eyes. He walked to the door, hand on the knob, paused. "If this is a mistake, I'll never repeat it." She turned to him finally, voice soft but sure. "It's not a mistake. It just wasn't the right moment." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year, then left without another word. Faith leaned against the door after it shut, every inch of her body still burning. And upstairs, in the dark quiet of his duplex, Tare Akin sat alone at his window, soaked to the bone with rain and longing. And for the first time in years, he wanted something he couldn't buy. The air was different the next evening. The rain had washed away the city's dust, leaving behind something cooler, quieter. But inside Faith, a storm still raged, unspoken, unfinished. She hadn't seen him all day, no jog that morning, no knock that evening. She told herself it was better this way, that what had almost happened was a mistake, that a single mother and a man like him lived in two separate worlds. She told herself he probably regretted it. And yet, she kept glancing at the window, kept hoping to hear his steps on the gravel. When she tucked Emily into bed that night, the little girl clung to her a bit longer than usual. "Will Uncle Jogger come again?" she whispered. Faith paused. "Why?" "I like when you smile after he leaves." Faith kissed her forehead, but her heart stumbled. She was still standing in the kitchen rinsing out Emily's lunchbox when the knock came. 3 slow, heavy taps. She froze. Towel in hand, hair wrapped, wearing nothing but a long t-shirt and shorts. No makeup. No preparation. Still, she opened the door. Tare stood there. No umbrella. No explanation. He looked at her like a man who hadn't slept. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said. She stepped aside. "But you did." "Yes." The door clicked shut behind him. No one moved. Until she did. She crossed the room barefoot, silent, stopped in front of him, and reached for his face. Her fingers grazed his jawline, rough with a day's stubble. She studied him, slowly, like a book she'd always wanted to read but was afraid to open. "I don't want to be careful tonight," she whispered. Tare swallowed, hard. "You sure?" She nodded. "Make me forget everything." The first kiss was nothing like the last. This one was fierce, mouths open, tongues tasting, hands urgent. He picked her up, and her legs wrapped around him instinctively. She clung to him as he carried her to the couch, then dropped to his knees, placing her down gently as if worshipping her body before he'd even undressed it. "Tell me where," he whispered, voice hoarse, lips brushing her thigh. "Everywhere," she breathed, and he obeyed. Clothes disappeared in staggered gasps, shirt by shirt, skin to skin, touch by trembling touch. Faith wasn't used to being desired like this. Not quietly, not with reverence. He didn't grope. He explored. He didn't rush. He devoured. He kissed her belly slowly like it was sacred ground. He mapped every curve of her waist with his hands. When his lips found the underside of her breast, she whimpered, arching into him. And when he finally entered her, slow, thick, deep, she gasped like he had unlocked a hidden room inside her body. Tare cursed softly under his breath. "Jesus, Faith." She held onto his shoulders, eyes closed, head tilted back, breathing him in. Every thrust was a confession, every moan a surrender. The couch creaked beneath them, the candlelight painting gold on his back as he moved inside her. He didn't look away once. His eyes locked on hers, not even when she whispered his name like a prayer. Tare. Her nails raked down his spine. His mouth found her collarbone, her throat, her lips. She came undone with his name in her mouth. And when he followed, groaning low against her skin, it felt like breaking and healing at the same time. Afterward, they didn't speak for a while. Faith lay on top of him, his heartbeat drumming beneath her ear, her fingers tracing the old scar near his ribs. He ran his hand up and down her bare back in slow, rhythmic strokes. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt like home. Finally, she whispered, "What happens now?" Tare's fingers paused. He looked down at her. "Now, I stay, unless you ask me to go." She didn't. Instead, she pressed her lips to his chest. And for the first time since his world collapsed, Tare Akin closed his eyes and slept, without fear. It didn't feel like an affair. It felt like gravity. Like she was the earth and he was something caught in orbit, always circling back to her no matter how far he pulled away. Every night that he came was different. Some nights it was gentle, others it was wild, but always it was honest. And always it left them both breathless. There was no name for what they were doing, but it was more than sex, more than just company. It was the way he looked at her when she wasn't speaking, the way he reached for her hand in the dark, the way she felt his breath on her shoulder and didn't flinch, because it felt like something sacred. They didn't plan to fall into rhythm, but a rhythm found them anyway. Tare would knock lightly, always after Emily was asleep. Faith would open the door, already in her robe or oversized t-shirt, her hair soft, her eyes expectant. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't even make it past the door. The nights melted into each other. On Monday, he undressed her slowly, murmuring praise with every inch he uncovered. On Wednesday, she pulled him into the kitchen while boiling water clicked behind them, her thighs gripping his waist as he lifted her onto the counter. On Friday, they didn't speak. They just breathed together, naked and pressed so close it felt like they could drown inside one another. Faith stopped asking herself what it meant. She only knew how it felt. And during the day, they pretended. Emily still called him Uncle Jogger. Faith still referred to him as our neighbor upstairs, when her colleagues asked where she stayed. He didn't linger outside, didn't make himself obvious. But every so often, she'd catch him glancing out from his upstairs balcony when she left for work. He never waved, just watched, calm, quiet, possessive in silence. She didn't wave back, but inside, she glowed. One Saturday morning, Faith sat on the couch with Emily painting her nails when a neighbor dropped in to borrow detergent. The woman, all gossip and soft perfume, pointed to the upstairs balcony and whispered, "That man upstairs, very fine. Does he ever talk to anyone?" Faith smiled politely. "Not really." The woman leaned in. "He's a bit mysterious, no? Some say he's hiding from something. Or someone." Faith's heart skipped. She laughed it off. "He's probably just tired of Lagos noise like the rest of us." But the comment lingered. She didn't know his story. Not truly. He never spoke of his past. Never explained what he did for work. All she knew was the way he touched her like she was rare. The way he looked at Emily like she mattered. And the way his silence wrapped around her like a safety net. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't. That night she waited longer than usual before texting him. "She's asleep." No response for a few minutes, then, "Should I come?" Her thumb hovered, then typed, "Yes." When he came, there was no teasing. He undressed her in the candlelight, his touch slow and focused like she was scripture. She gasped when he kissed the inside of her knee, moaned when his mouth dragged up the curve of her thigh. Her body arched when he slid into her, deep and sure, his fingers gripping her hips like he was anchoring himself to reality. Their movements were quiet, desperate, like they were trying to memorize each other. When it was over, they lay tangled together, skin slick, hearts slowing. She traced the shape of his shoulder with her fingertips. "You don't say much about yourself," she murmured. He kissed her temple. "There's not much to say." She didn't press. She just rested her cheek on his chest and let the silence hold them. They were tethered now, not officially, not out loud, but bodies don't lie. And every time he left her bed before dawn, Faith curled into his warmth, still echoing from his touch. And every time he stepped back into his own space upstairs, Tare realized he'd left something behind, something he was no longer sure he wanted to live without. They hadn't spoken in 3 days. It wasn't planned, but it happened. Tare didn't knock. Faith didn't text. And for the first time since their bodies found each other, they started pretending again. Pretending it hadn't changed everything. Faith busied herself with marking scripts and keeping Emily occupied with homework and cartoons. Tare jogged early, came back late, stayed upstairs. The silence between their windows was sharp, like something had snapped, but neither of them wanted to look at it. She told herself it was for the best. What they were doing was messy, confusing. She had a child, a job, a routine she'd built carefully after the rubble of her past. She couldn't afford to be reckless, but her body didn't care. Every night her skin ached, her sheets smelled like him. And her dreams? They were soaked in memory. His breath on her neck, his mouth on her thighs, his fingers on the nape of her spine like he was writing love letters into her skin. Tare didn't sleep either. He spent hours in the quiet, dark duplex staring at the ceiling, trying to remind himself that this wasn't part of the plan. He'd moved to Lagos to escape, to lay low, to be forgotten. But Faith refused to be forgettable. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the curve of her lips when she whispered his name, the softness of her belly rising beneath his hand, the sound she made right before she came. She was not a woman you got over, and avoiding her was like holding back the tide. By the 4th day, the silence became unbearable. Faith was cooking, a pot of yam porridge bubbling gently on the stove. Emily was asleep after reading 3 bedtime stories. The room smelled of palm oil, pepper, and plantain. Everything was ordinary, until there was a knock, not at the front door, at the back one, the side entrance by the kitchen. Soft, intentional. Faith turned off the stove, her heart in her throat. She opened it slowly. Tare stood there. A hoodie clung to his frame. No umbrella, no excuses, just him. And that look she hadn't seen in 4 nights. "I didn't mean to stay away this long," he said quietly. Faith's voice came out hoarse. "I wasn't sure if you were coming back. I wasn't sure I should." They stood there, eyes locked. Then she stepped aside, wordlessly. This time, there were no games. She reached for him first, pulling his hoodie off, standing on her toes to kiss him. He gripped her waist like he needed proof she was real. Her hands were in his hair, tugging. His mouth was at her jaw, her throat, then lower. They didn't make it to the bedroom. Right there in the small, dimly lit kitchen, he lifted her onto the counter beside the stove. Her thighs parted, and he stepped between them. She yanked her shirt over her head, bare beneath. His eyes darkened instantly. Jesus, Faith. He buried his face in her chest, groaning as her fingers raked down his back. She kissed his neck, biting gently, tasting his sweat and salt and need. Their bodies came together fast, desperate. He slid into her with a groan that vibrated through her bones. She wrapped her legs around him tighter. The wooden cabinets rattled with each thrust. Her fingers clutched his shoulders, her head thrown back as he whispered her name like it was sacred. When she came, she bit his shoulder to stop from crying out. When he followed, it was with a hoarse moan and a kiss that felt more like a vow than a climax. Afterward, they leaned against each other, still tangled, still shaking. Faith buried her face in his chest. We're terrible at staying away from each other. I'm not even sorry, he whispered. She laughed softly against his skin. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she pulled back and asked quietly, "What are we doing, Tare?" He looked at her with something soft. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I can't stop." Faith nodded slowly. "Me neither." They didn't try to avoid each other again after that. Whatever line they'd been pretending not to cross was gone. Now there was only heat, only longing, only the quiet dread of how deeply they were falling without a name for it. But names were coming. So was truth. And truth never stayed buried for long. Monday started like any other. The morning rush, Emily's protests about combing her hair, the usual race against the school bell, Faith's quiet sighs over her barely ironed blouse and the slightly burnt toast. But she was glowing, still floating from the weekend. Tare's hands, his mouth, the way he lingered inside her long after they'd stopped moving. There was something different now. He didn't just come to her bed. He lingered in her kitchen, her thoughts, her skin. That morning, he'd waved at Emily from the gate and whispered in Faith's ear, "Dinner tonight?" She nodded, smiling as she walked to the car. If happiness had a taste, she was living in it. Until lunch break. The staff room buzzed with usual chatter. Teachers unwrapping moi moi and jollof from plastic bowls. Radios playing quietly in corners. Laughter over failed test scripts and stubborn students. Faith sat at the edge, flipping through a pile of marked exercise books when Ngozi, the new NYSC court member, dropped beside her. "Madam Faith," she grinned. "You won't believe who I saw in Billionaire this weekend." Faith raised an eyebrow, half listening. Ngozi tapped her phone screen, zooming into a photo. "I was just scrolling and I saw this article about one low-key billionaire philanthropist who hasn't been in public for a while. Then boom, this man's picture appears. God, see fine man." Faith barely looked, then froze. Her heart dropped. The man on the screen wore a black tuxedo, standing next to a luxury car at some charity event. His smile was faint. Signature. She knew those eyes. She knew the sharp line of that jaw, the stillness in his posture. Tare. The headline above the photo read, "Elusive billionaire Tare Akin makes quiet return at Lagos Children's Foundation Gala." Her throat went dry. She stared at the photo like it had been photoshopped, like it was fiction, but she knew. It was him, and he'd lied. Ngozi was still gushing. "Look at that face. You know those men that look like they know the weight of the world? And see the salt and pepper beard. Ugh." Faith forced a small laugh. "Yeah, he does look familiar." Her hands trembled beneath the table. She barely made it through the rest of the school day. Her head spun. Tare. A billionaire? Everything began clicking at once. The elegance in his movements. The way he handled things quietly. How he never said much about work or his past. The duplex. The car he never parked inside the compound. The night he told her nothing about himself, because he was hiding everything. And she'd opened her body to him, her home, her child. He watched her undress without ever letting her see who he really was. She felt sick. Back at the compound, she didn't wait for him to knock. She stormed up to the duplex. Her fists hit the door once, twice. He opened it. "Faith?" She held up her phone, the article still on the screen. His expression shifted. Not shock, not guilt, just silence. "So it's true," she whispered. All this time, you let me think you were just some guy hiding from stress, renting his landlord's house. I never told you that," he said quietly. "You didn't correct me either." Silence. "Tare Akin," she said, her voice trembling. Do you know what it feels like to strip yourself bare in front of a man you thought was just like you? Struggling, simple, human, only to find out he's a goddamn billionaire who's been slumming it in your backyard. You let me open up to you. You touched my daughter, slept in my bed, ate my food, and I thought we were building something real. Two broken people trying to find peace. I never meant to lie, he said, stepping closer. But you did, by omission. Every time I asked about you and you dodged it. That was a choice. Tare exhaled sharply. I didn't want this to be about money, about who I was. I wanted peace. I wanted to be wanted for the man I am now, not the name I left behind. Faith stared at him, a storm building in her eyes. And what are we, Tare? A vacation for your soul? Something simple before you go back to your empire? No, he said fiercely. You're not a detour. You're the first real thing I've felt in years. Faith swallowed hard, then stepped back. I need space. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. And when she turned and walked down the stairs, her legs barely held her upright. That night, Tare stood at his window, watching the light go off in her room. He had tried to keep his truth separate. Now it threatened to ruin everything. And downstairs, Faith lay in bed, tears hot on her cheeks, because even after the lie, her body still missed him. And that was the worst betrayal of all. The silence between them stretched into days. Faith ignored the knock when it came, ignored the texts, ignored Emily's questions. Is Uncle Jogger angry? Why doesn't he come anymore? Tare didn't push. But every morning she felt his presence from her window. Still jogging, still moving past the gate at exactly 6:30 a.m., like clockwork. As if staying visible, without intruding, was his only apology. Faith told herself she needed space. Time to think. But time didn't help when the ache remained so physical, so cellular. Every quiet moment reminded her of his voice, his scent, his weight on her skin. Still, she held her distance. She was finally gathering the courage to go speak with him, when life decided to speak first. And it wore red lipstick. It was a Saturday morning. Emily was at a neighbor's birthday party next door. Faith had just stepped out with a bowl of peeled oranges, dressed in a faded oversized shirt. She didn't see the black Range Rover glide in until it stopped in front of the compound gate. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, tall, slim. Her skin gleamed like polished wood. Her heels clicked with certainty. Every inch of her screamed money, entitlement, and uninvited history. Faith froze. The woman's eyes swept over her with the slow precision of a blade before she smiled. You must be the house girl. Faith blinked. She was too stunned to speak. The woman walked toward the duplex like she owned the sun and the sidewalk beneath it. I'm looking for Tare, she said with a wave of her manicured hand, not bothering to stop. He's not in, Faith replied coolly. That made the woman pause. She turned back. Oh, so you're not the house girl? No. A pause. The woman's lips curled. The new one, then. I see. Faith said nothing. Her fingers clenched the orange bowl tightly. She has your eyes, the woman added offhandedly, nodding toward the party next door where Emily's laughter drifted faintly. I beg your pardon? The woman smirked. Relax. I'm not here to fight. I'm his wife, or rather, soon-to-be ex-wife. Faith's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice level. And why are you here? To remind him what he walked away from. Faith's eyes narrowed. You think he forgot? The woman shrugged. Men forget many things when they're sulking in their empty mansions and crawling into beds that smell like struggle. The insult landed, sharper than a slap. But Faith didn't flinch. She smiled instead. Then I suppose he must have been starving, because he keeps coming back. The woman's face twitched, just slightly. Before she could reply, the door upstairs opened. Tare stood at the balcony. He hadn't shaved, wore a plain black shirt, but his voice carried strong. Annette, you shouldn't be here. Annette turned, smiling sweetly. But darling, you never return my calls. I had to check if you were still alive. I am. And living like a monk in this ghetto? She said, raising her arms as if in disbelief. Honestly, Tare, you've always been dramatic. Faith turned slowly, walking back into her flat. She shut the door without looking up at him. Later that night, he knocked. She opened the door halfway. You didn't tell me you were married, she said quietly. Because I wasn't. Not in any way that mattered anymore. We've been separated for over 2 years. The paperwork's been filed. She's just stubborn. Stubborn enough to insult me to my face and stroll into your compound like she owns it. I didn't know she'd show up, he said. She used to manipulate me with softness, now she tries with shame. Faith folded her arms. And did it work this time? No. They stood in silence. Then she asked the one thing that scared her most. Why didn't you tell me who you really were, Tare? He stepped forward, not touching, just close. Because for once in my life, I didn't want to be the man with the money, the suit, the name. I just wanted to be a man. And you saw me like that. I didn't want to lose it. Faith blinked back, the heat stinging her eyes. And what do you see when you look at me? He stepped closer. Their breaths mingled. A woman who sees through me, who laughs like sunlight, who makes burnt stew taste like home. A woman I want. Not for convenience, not for comfort, but for forever. Her throat tightened. He raised a hand, touched her jaw. I didn't plan for you, Faith, but now I can't imagine the world without you in it. She leaned into his touch for a second, then pulled away. I need time, she whispered. He nodded, and for once, he didn't try to bargain. That night, Tare stood at the balcony, alone. His ex-wife's perfume still haunted the air, but it was Faith's absence that hurt. And downstairs, Faith lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a man could be everything she never wanted, and somehow still be exactly what she needed. Faith hadn't let him back in her bed. Not since that morning Annette arrived like a storm in heels. It had been 10 days, 10 long, aching days, 10 days of polite, distant hellos at the compound gate, of him no longer knocking at night, of Faith staying busy, schoolwork, extra lessons, laundry folded and refolded, prayers whispered half-heartedly into the dark, but nothing numbed it. Her body still remembered his weight. Her fingers still curled at night, searching for his warmth. She hated him for that, hated how her skin craved a man she swore she was done with, but more than anything, she missed him. She was grading scripts that Saturday evening when the knock came. Gentle, no rush. She opened the door to find Tare standing there, this time in a fitted white linen shirt. No hoodie, no tension. His beard trimmed, eyes soft, unreadable. Can I come in? Faith hesitated. He stepped closer, offering a folded document. I wanted you to see this first. She took it. Her eyes scanned quickly. Finalized divorce decree. Tare Akin, officially divorced. She looked up, startled. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm not tied to anything anymore, he said quietly. Not my past, not her, not shame, just you if you'll have me. Faith's heart thundered. I still need time. No, he said, stepping inside, voice velvet, firm. You've had time. I've had time, and I've given you space. But Faith, I'm tired of pretending I don't wake up every day craving you. She backed up slowly, pulse racing. You lied? And I've apologized. I came clean. I stood down when you needed air. But now I'm breathing again, and I want you. Not for a night, not for a season. He stepped closer. Tell me you don't still think about me when you touch yourself at night. Her breath caught. He reached out, cupping her cheek. Tell me your body forgot mine. Her lips parted, but no words came. He leaned in, whispered against her throat. Tell me you don't want me to take you right here against this wall. Her knees buckled. He caught her and kissed her. It was not the soft kiss of regret. It was deep, dominant, possessive. He devoured her mouth while his hands gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. She moaned into him, anger, relief, desire crashing like waves. Tare, she gasped. He pressed her against the wall, fingers already sliding beneath her blouse. I'm not here to talk anymore, he growled. I'm here to remind your body what it forgot. Clothes fell like confessions. He sucked her nipples until she arched. She grabbed his belt, yanked it loose, her breath wild. When he entered her, she cried out, loud, needy. He moved hard and slow, whispering filth and worship into her ear. You feel like sin. She bit his shoulder. Then don't stop sinning. They stayed there, pressed against the wall until she shook from release. He carried her to bed like glass, started again, slower, sweeter, like making love for the first time. Afterward, they lay tangled, breathless, silent. His thumb drew lazy circles on her hip. I meant every word, he said. I want this. You, Emily, the quiet, the chaos, all of it. Faith turned to face him. You don't want to go back to that life? I already walked away, but now I know where I want to stay. She studied him, searched his face for lies, found none. Finally, she whispered, "Then stay." He kissed her forehead. "I already did." Faith stood on the steps of the duplex, arms folded, eyes narrowed at the front door like it had offended her personally. "You're not serious," she said again. Tare chuckled behind her. "I've never been more serious." "We're fine where we are." "No, you're not. We don't need space." He raised an eyebrow. "Faith, your water heater leaks. The ceiling fan clicks like it's ready to fall and confess to murder. Your daughter's toys are all crammed into a plastic bucket. Come upstairs." Faith sighed. He walked closer, stood behind her, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Let me take care of you. Of both of you." She tilted her head slightly. "It's not about the house, Tare." "I know," he said. "It's about control. You've been doing it alone so long, you don't know how to stop fighting." She swallowed hard. "I'm not asking you to stop being strong," he whispered against her neck. "I'm asking you to let someone carry it with you." She leaned into him, breathing in his scent. "Okay," she said quietly. "But we keep the BQ. Just in case." He smiled. "Fair. You can call it your emotional panic room." The move happened quickly. 2 days later, Tare cleared out the second bedroom and turned it into a full princess-themed wonderland. Pink wallpaper, fairy lights, a dollhouse that could house a small goat. By the time Emily walked in and saw it, she screamed with joy and hugged both of them at once. "But wait," she gasped, eyes wide. "Why is my bed here?" Faith crouched beside her. "Because we're staying here now, sweetheart." Emily blinked. "Forever?" Faith hesitated. "Well, we'll see." Tare knelt down beside them. "Emily," he said gently, "your mummy and I, we really like each other. And if it's okay with you, I'd like us to be a family." Emily's face lit up. Like Christmas morning and birthday cake and fireworks all exploded at once. "You mean, like you're my daddy now?" Faith's heart clenched, but Tare didn't flinch. He reached for her small hand. "If you'll have me." Emily threw herself into his arms. Tare caught her, held her, and for the first time in years, he felt like something was being returned to him. Not wealth, not power, but belonging. That night, Faith stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom and watched him read to Emily. Her daughter was curled into his side, giggling at something in the story. Tare's voice was animated, eyes soft, completely focused. And in that moment, she saw it. Not the billionaire, not the man in headlines. Just a father. Her daughter's father. Maybe not by blood, but by something deeper. By choice. Later, when the house went quiet and Emily was asleep, she found him in the kitchen making tea. She walked up behind him, slipped her arms around his waist. "You're ridiculous, you know that?" He smiled over his shoulder. "Ridiculously handsome. Ridiculously perfect." Tare turned, placing the mug down. "Come here," he said. And then he kissed her. Not out of lust, but out of quiet certainty. "You made me feel like a man again," he whispered. "Not a headline, not a transaction, just a man. And now I want to be your man." Faith's eyes shimmered. "You already are." They made love that night with the windows open, the night breeze slipping across their skin. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, deep, consuming. Every sigh a promise, every moan a vow. Emily didn't ask again if he was staying. She just started calling him Daddy like she had waited her whole life to finally say it. And Faith? She stopped pretending she wasn't in love. But not every story allows its joy to go uninterrupted. Far away from their bubble, a storm was gathering. And this time it wasn't jealousy. It was something colder, calculated. Annette wasn't done. She hadn't lost Tare. Not yet.